This MOM and her son vanished on a car cruise in 1971, but this was found in a junkyard 19 years later, and it would unravel the mystery behind the whole disappearance. In the summer of 1971, the small Virginia town of Willow Creek felt like a place frozen in time. Slow mornings, familiar faces, and a rhythm of life that rarely changed. Among its residents was the Terrence family, Mr. and Mrs. Terrence and their only son, Jeremiah, a bright-eyed 19-year-old with a grin that could light up a room. After working tirelessly for 6 months at a nearby oil company, he finally achieved what he'd dreamed of for years, buying his very first car. A glossy Benz, shining like a badge of honor in the family driveway. That Saturday morning, the excitement was almost childlike. Jeremiah had polished the car twice already, checking the mirrors, wiping the dashboard, and adjusting the radio. He planned a road trip, nothing fancy, just a simple ride through the countryside with his parents, a celebration of independence and gratitude. "Dad, you ready?" Jeremiah called out eagerly. But his father was outside, laughing loudly with his friends, a bottle of soda in hand, a deck of cards on the table. He waved Jeremiah off without even standing. "Go with your mother," he said. "We'll take a trip together next time, son." Jeremiah hesitated for a moment, but his mother stepped beside him, smiling warmly. "We'll have a wonderful time," she said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Her reassurance was enough. Jeremiah smiled, kissed his father on the cheek, and the two of them climbed into the car. The engine purred to life, and as they drove away, Mrs. Terrence waved back at the house, unaware that it would be the last time she would ever see it. The sun dipped slowly behind the hills as hours passed. The father expected them to return before dark, but when the clock struck 7 p.m., he began pacing. By 10 p.m. he was outside, scanning the quiet road, trying to swallow a growing sense of dread. Midnight came with no headlights turning into the driveway, no engine humming in the distance. He called the police. By dawn, search teams were combing through every road within a 50-mile radius. Officers walked along ditches with flashlights, volunteers shouted Jeremiah and his mother's names into the woods, and divers checked the nearby river despite having no reason to believe the car veered that way. The father rode in the passenger seat of a patrol car, staring out the window as if he could force the world to give back what it had taken. But there was nothing. No skid marks. No broken branches. No signs of struggle. No abandoned car. No witnesses who saw them pass. It was as though the road had simply opened its mouth and swallowed Jeremiah and his mother whole. Rumors spread. Some claimed the car might have plunged off a cliff no one had found yet. Others whispered that they had run away intentionally, though no one could imagine why. A few believed something darker had happened, but there was no evidence to point in any direction. Days turned into weeks, and Willow Creek slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But inside the Terrence home, the silence was suffocating. The father's laughter vanished, his friends stopped visiting, and the empty chairs at the dining table became a daily reminder of the nightmare he couldn't wake from. The case went cold. The road kept its secrets, and life moved on. But the mystery never stopped breathing beneath the surface. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video already, subscribe to this channel. For nearly 2 decades, the disappearance of Jeremiah and his mother became the ghost that refused to leave Willow Creek. At first, the town rallied behind the Terrence family, offering meals, prayers, volunteer search parties, and endless speculation whispered behind closed doors. But as days turned to months and months sank quietly into years, the mystery only deepened, sinking its claws into the town's collective memory. By 1973, the case was no longer just a missing persons file, it had become a legend. Children grew up hearing the story as a warning not to wander too far. Teenagers dared each other to visit the lonely stretch of road where Jeremiah and his mother were last seen. And adults, though they rarely spoke of it openly, carried an unspoken weight every time they drove that same route. Something had happened there, something no one could explain. Rumors sprouted like weeds. Some believed Jeremiah and his mother had been kidnapped by drifters passing through. Others claimed the pair had run away, though no one could explain why a boy with a new car and a future ahead would abandon everything he loved. Darker theories took root too. Whispers of a cult that met deep in the woods, stories of strange lights seen by truckers who swore they weren't drunk, and tales that the road itself was cursed, swallowing people who traveled it at the wrong time. Through it all, Mr. Terrence refused to stop searching. For years, he drove up and down highways, knocking on doors from one county to the next, chasing every rumor that so much as mentioned an unfamiliar blue sedan. He poured his savings into private investigators. He skipped meals, quit hobbies, and let his friendships crumble as his obsession consumed him. He clung tightly to the hope, however faint, that his family might someday return. By the late 1980s, he had aged far beyond his years. His once dark hair had streaks of gray, his shoulders had slumped, and his eyes carried a hollow sadness that no amount of time could fill. The town watched him with quiet pity, knowing he lived in a limbo between hope and despair. The police had long since classified the case as cold, the word alone hitting him like a stab each time he heard it. Life in Willow Creek continued, even if the wound never fully healed. Children who were newborns when Jeremiah vanished were now young adults. The road where it happened had been repaved. New families had moved in, unaware of the legend entirely. By 1990, the mystery had settled into the background of the town's identity. Not forgotten, but no longer spoken of with urgency. It had simply become a part of Willow Creek's history, a chapter with no final page. And then, in the early hours of a fog-covered morning, a phone rang inside the local police station. A junkyard worker, voice trembling, reported something unusual. A crushed car had arrived in a batch of metal scraps, its frame twisted and faded with age. But the license plate, the number, the sequence, it matched exactly the one belonging to Jeremiah Terrence. In an instant, the cold case thawed with violent force. Police cars raced to the junkyard. Officers stared at the rusted heap as though they were facing a ghost. The whispers began again, louder this time, fueled by urgency and dread. Where had the car been all these years? Who had dumped it? And most importantly, if the car had returned, where were Jeremiah and his mother? The town, once again, found itself holding its breath as the past clawed its way into the present, refusing to remain buried any longer. The junkyard was eerily silent that morning, the air thick with dust and the metallic scent of rust. Rows of crushed cars stretched like fallen soldiers under the weak sunlight. When the police arrived, the officers' boots crunched against gravel as they circled the heap of metal that had brought the case back to life. It was unlike anything they had seen before. A mangled blue sedan, the frame twisted in impossible angles, paint peeled and chipped as though scraped by some unimaginable force. The license plate, corroded but still legible, identified it immediately: Jeremiah Terrence. Detectives and forensic specialists crouched down, examining the crushed roof and buckled doors. The frame had been compacted with such violence that the car looked less like a vehicle and more like a relic of some industrial catastrophe. Rust had eaten through panels unevenly, leaving jagged, almost sculpted edges. Every dent and crease told a story, but it was a story that didn't make sense. It was too precise, too purposeful. Unlike the twisted wrecks left behind by accidents, the kind that happened on winding roads during storms. This was deliberate, methodical, almost cold in its execution. One officer tapped the frame with a gloved hand. This wasn't a normal crash. Someone wanted this destroyed. His voice carried the weight of realization, echoing softly against the other heaps of metal. The detectives exchanged glances, feeling the old unease creep back into their bones. The case that had haunted Willow Creek for nearly 2 decades was no longer just a cold trail of unanswered questions. The evidence was literally in their hands, rusted and bent, whispering secrets from the past. Investigators began taking photographs, measuring the angles, and noting the unusual compression patterns. Every detail suggested something unnatural had happened to the car after it had been wrecked, almost as if someone had tried to erase its existence completely. The tires were missing. The glass windows had been shattered and ground into the metal. The vehicle's structure told the story of brute force applied methodically, almost mechanically. Whoever had handled this car after its accident had gone to great lengths to ensure no trace of its original shape remained. Then came the realization. The date. Accident reports were checked immediately, first for 1971, the year Jeremiah and his mother vanished. Nothing. No record. It was as though the car had simply disappeared from the radar of time. Panic and confusion rippled through the team. Every lead they had relied upon for nearly 20 years had been cold. And now, the car that should have tied everything together had emerged, but in the wrong timeline. Next, they checked the records for the early 1980s, thinking perhaps the car had been involved in a later accident and misidentified. Still, nothing matched. The plates had never been reported lost or involved in any collision during that decade. It was an enigma wrapped in steel and rust, a mystery that defied logic and threatened to reopen every wound the town had tried to bury. The detectives looked at each other, each silently realizing that this was no ordinary discovery. This was the beginning of uncovering a truth long hidden, one that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. The frame seemed to stare back at them, silent and accusatory. It carried the weight of lost lives, the absence of justice, and decades of unanswered questions. Every officer present felt the gravity of the moment. Somewhere within the twisted metal lay answers to the questions that had haunted families for 19 years. Who had caused the accident? Why had the car remained hidden? And, most importantly, where were Jeremiah and his mother? The police station was unusually quiet that afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the linoleum floor, but even the warmth of the day could not penetrate the chill in the room. Officers were reviewing the photographs of the crushed car when the front door creaked open. Heads turned as a man entered, tall, worn, but with an unmistakable presence of quiet authority. His eyes were red-rimmed, hands trembling slightly as he clutched a small, leather-bound Bible to his chest. He paused, took a deep breath, and then approached the front desk. I know what happened," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every word seemed to carry a lifetime of guilt and fear. The officers exchanged puzzled looks. Visitors rarely walked in with such certainty about a case long buried in cold files. The man introduced himself as Cole Fisher, a 33-year-old pastor from a nearby town. There was a tension in his stance, a nervous energy that suggested he had wrestled with this moment for decades. Detective Reynolds gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Fisher, tell us what you know," he said cautiously. Cole swallowed hard, gripping the Bible tighter as if drawing courage from it. "I was 14 in 1971, he began. His voice shook slightly at first, then steadied as the words began to flow. "I was coming home from school that morning. My uncle, Jamie Fisher, picked me up in his truck. He was driving recklessly, as always. I thought it was just the way he drove, loud and careless, nothing more. But that day, it wasn't ordinary." He paused, eyes distant, reliving the memory. "We were driving along a lonely rural road, the kind where trees grow close to the edge, shadows stretching across the asphalt. I remember seeing a car ahead, a small ash Benz. My uncle was speeding and swerving, honking at passing vehicles. He lost control, and he crashed into it." The detectives leaned in, the weight of his confession pressing into the room. Cole's hands shook so violently that he could barely hold his Bible steady. I didn't know what to do," he admitted. "My uncle," he panicked. "He called someone, I don't remember who, and then he dragged the people from the car." His voice cracked. "He buried them deeper into the bush. He didn't want anyone to find them." A heavy silence fell. The officers exchanged glances, absorbing the magnitude of what Cole had just revealed. A car that had vanished for 19 years, bodies that had never been recovered, And now, here was a witness who had lived with the secret for almost 2 decades. Cole's eyes flicked downward, ashamed. He made me swear I'd never tell a soul. He said if I did, he'd kill me. I was only a scared boy. I obeyed. I couldn't say a word. Detective Reynolds leaned forward. And the car? The remains we found at the junkyard. Cole's voice dropped to a whisper. The car didn't disappear. My uncle crushed it. He wanted to destroy it, erase every trace of what happened. Tears welled in his eyes. I've carried this secret my entire life. Every time I saw news about missing people, I wondered if this would ever come out. And now, seeing that car, I can't stay silent anymore. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes as though trying to push away the memory that had haunted him for years. The room felt heavy, every officer present sensing the truth in his words. The story of a vanishing mother and son, long unsolved, was about to be rewritten. Cole's courage had opened a door to a decades-old crime, to the family still waiting for answers, and to justice that had been delayed but was no longer impossible. And as he spoke, the realization settled like a stone in the room. Someone's recklessness, and the deliberate cover-up that followed, had remained hidden for years, but it was finally coming to light. The quiet hum of the police station erupted into controlled chaos as the first news broke. Jamie Fisher had been located and taken into custody. The man, once a shadow lurking in the memories of a terrified boy, was now sitting handcuffed in an interrogation room, his face pale and drawn, eyes darting nervously to the officers around him. The weight of decades of secrecy and guilt had finally caught up. Detective Reynolds leaned forward, voice calm but firm. Jamie Fisher, we know what happened that day in 1971. It's time to tell the truth. Jamie's hands shook uncontrollably. For a moment, he tried to remain silent, tried to hide behind defiance and years of denial. But the dam of fear and guilt broke within minutes. Tears streamed down his face as he began to speak, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. He recounted in vivid detail the reckless drive on that lonely rural road, the collision with Jeremiah's car, and the immediate panic that had gripped him. He described how he had dragged Jeremiah and his mother's bodies deeper into the dense woodland, burying them to prevent discovery, and then crushed the car using the truck's hydraulic press before arranging for its ruins to be quietly transported to scrap dealers over the years. Every word he spoke carried the weight of decades of silence. Every officer in the room felt the gravity of the confession. The tragedy that had haunted Willow Creek for nearly 20 years was no longer a story of disappearance. It was a deliberate, coldly executed cover-up. But the revelations did not stop with Jamie. I didn't act alone, he confessed, voice quivering. It was Tyrell Long, my superior. He told me exactly what to do. He said the company couldn't afford a scandal. He made me bury them. He told me to destroy the car. The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then, within hours, Tyrell Long was located and arrested. A man of middle age, meticulous and polished in appearance, he had been a quiet figure in the corporate world, known for keeping operations running smoothly and ensuring profits never faltered. Yet beneath the composed exterior, there was a ruthless willingness to protect the company's image at any cost. Under questioning, Tyrell's facade quickly crumbled. He did not deny the orders. Instead, he revealed a chilling hierarchy of command. I was following instructions, he said quietly. The CEO, he made the final call. He wanted the accident buried immediately. Reputation over everything. He didn't care about a boy and his mother. The name stunned everyone in the room. The CEO, a man whose influence spanned the entire city, respected by politicians, businessmen, and citizens alike, had prioritized his public image over human life. He had been untouchable for decades, a pillar of success and propriety. Yet here, behind the walls of a modest police station, his name linked him directly to one of the most shocking cover-ups the state had ever encountered. Detective Reynolds jotted down notes, his mind racing. We need him brought in immediately. No one is above the law. The arrest of the CEO sent shockwaves through the community. Newspapers reported it in bold headlines, radio commentators speculated endlessly, and citizens who had long thought justice had slipped through their fingers were suddenly galvanized. A once cold case that had faded into legend now commanded the full attention of law enforcement, the public, and the media. From the quiet fears of a boy who had witnessed it all to the meticulous planning of corporate officials determined to hide their mistakes, the investigation had erupted into a storm. Every layer that had hidden the truth for 19 years was peeling away. The reckless driver, the complicit superior, and the untouchable CEO, all were now facing accountability. And as the city watched, the realization settled over everyone like a shadow lifting. Justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. The truth that had been buried alongside Jeremiah and his mother was being exhumed, and no amount of power or influence could stop it now. The nightmare that had haunted Willow Creek for decades was finally unraveling, one confession at a time. Meanwhile, the morning after Cole Fisher's confession to the police, a heavy silence settled over his home. The man who had carried a secret for nearly 2 decades now bore the full weight of its consequences. His family, long accustomed to quiet deference and loyalty to tradition, reacted with shock and anger. His father refused to speak to him for days. His cousins whispered behind closed doors, and even his siblings avoided his gaze. Cole's act of courage, exposing his uncle Jamie Fisher, the reckless driver responsible for the deaths of Jeremiah Terrence and his mother, had torn open old family loyalties, laying bare a truth that many had preferred remain buried. It was not just his blood relatives who struggled with his revelation. Cole's church, once united under his guidance and pastoral care, faced division. Some congregants questioned why he had brought disgrace upon his family. Whispers circulated about loyalty versus morality, faith versus obligation. Invitations to speak at services dwindled, and a few even suggested that Cole had acted out of personal vendetta. Yet, through the pain and isolation, Cole remained resolute. His voice, once quiet and hesitant, grew firm. "Justice is more important than blood," he told anyone willing to listen. "The truth cannot be sacrificed to protect those who would harm others. The lives of Jeremiah and his mother demand accountability." The interrogation room at the police station felt unusually tense the day the CEO was brought in for questioning. He walked in with a kind of confidence reserved for men who had never feared consequences, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, his expression calm and composed. To the outside world, he was untouchable, respected, wealthy, and untarnished by any scandal. But behind closed doors, facing detectives who now held the combined confessions of Jamie Fisher and Tyrell Long, he felt a flicker of unease he hadn't experienced in decades. Detective Reynolds began, his tone firm but measured. "Sir, we have Jamie Fisher's full confession. We have Tyrell Long's account. We have physical evidence linking your company to the concealment of Jeremiah Terrence and his mother. This is your opportunity to be honest." For a moment, the CEO's lips pressed into a tight line. I know nothing about any of this," he replied, voice steady but a fraction too controlled. His staff had shielded him for years, and he believed that distance would protect him. But the room was a cage, and the walls were closing in. Detectives produced old phone records. Call logs from 1971 showed repeated conversations between him and Tyrell Long on the day of the accident. Staff testimonies confirmed long-standing practices of covering up incidents to avoid public scrutiny. Finally, Jamie's account detailed the instructions he received, tracing every step back to the CEO himself. Sweat formed along the CEO's hairline. The weight of undeniable evidence forced him into confession. I instructed Tyrell to handle it quietly," he admitted reluctantly, his voice faltering. "The company. I could not risk a scandal. Reckless drivers, accidents, public scrutiny. It would have destroyed us. I never meant for anyone to die. His words trailed off, swallowed by the gravity of what he had caused. The truth was laid bare. Power, pride, and fear of reputation had overridden conscience. A mother and son, lost and buried, had been sacrificed to protect the company's image, and the man who had orchestrated the cover-up had lived freely for decades. The ensuing court case gripped the entire state. Newspapers splashed headlines about the CEO's fall from grace, while radio talk shows debated the moral responsibility of the company's leadership. Television crews broadcasted images of Jamie and Tyrell entering the courthouse, their faces weary yet resigned. Mr. Terrence attended every hearing, his hands trembling each time a new witness took the stand. He listened to the details of the cover-up, reliving the loss of his wife and son as though it were happening all over again. During the trial, Jamie recounted the reckless drive, the panic, and the burial of the bodies. Tyrell explained the orders he received from the CEO, and the legal team presented the meticulously documented phone records and staff statements. Each piece of evidence was like a hammer striking the foundations of deceit, building an airtight case that left no room for denial. When the verdicts were finally read, the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. Jamie Fisher, Tyrell Long, and the CEO were all found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Life imprisonment was handed down to each, ensuring that the architects of the decades-long cover-up would never again escape accountability. Mr. Terrence sat in the gallery, tears streaming down his face. Relief, sorrow, and vindication swirled together inside him. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The nightmare that had haunted him for 19 years was, at last, confronted and condemned. The system had faltered for nearly 2 decades, but now, through painstaking investigation and the courage of a single witness who refused to remain silent, the men responsible had been held accountable. Outside the courthouse, the reactions were mixed but intense. Many praised Cole's bravery, acknowledging the personal cost he had paid. Others, still loyal to family or skeptical of past actions, voiced criticism and resentment. Yet, amidst the turmoil, Cole found a strange clarity and inner peace he had never known. For nearly 20 years, the secret had been a heavy weight pressing on his conscience. By finally speaking, he released decades of guilt, fear, and doubt. Life after the trial was irrevocably changed. Cole faced estrangement from some loved ones, endured whispered judgment from portions of his congregation, and navigated the lingering tension of public scrutiny. But he also found unexpected support from strangers, community members, and even Mr. Terrence, who publicly acknowledged Cole's pivotal role in uncovering the truth. Cole's courage inspired others, reminding everyone that moral integrity often requires personal sacrifice and that the right choice is rarely easy. In quiet moments, Cole reflected on the journey from that fateful day in 1971, when a terrified boy sat in the back of his uncle's truck, to now, a man of faith who had confronted evil, risked everything, and helped bring closure to a grieving family. He understood, finally, that peace is not found in avoiding pain or conflict, but in standing for what is right, even when it isolates you from those closest to you. Cole had lost family support, endured social division, and faced the echoes of fear he had carried since adolescence. Yet, he had gained something far more profound: the knowledge that truth had triumphed, justice had been served, and his conscience was finally free. For the first time in his life, he felt the quiet, unwavering calm of a man who had done everything he could to honor those who could no longer speak for themselves. In a world too often silenced by fear, Cole Fisher had become the voice that mattered most. Reporters shouted questions, but Mr. Terrence barely noticed. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Though nothing could bring back Jeremiah and his mother, the guilty had been punished. The truth was finally public, the veil of secrecy ripped away, and Willow Creek could begin to breathe again. Justice had been served, and the shadow that had loomed over the town for nearly 20 years had been lifted. For 19 years, Jeremiah Terrence and his mother had been lost to the world, their absence a silent, gnawing wound on the town, and an unhealed scar in the heart of Mr. Terrence. Today, that wound would be confronted, and the town would gather to finally grant them the dignity they had been denied for so long. The cemetery, small and unassuming, had been prepared meticulously. Fresh earth mounded in neat rows, the scent of soil mingling with the faint aroma of pine from the surrounding woods. Hundreds of people had come, neighbors, community members, and those who had followed the story for decades, drawn by sorrow, curiosity, and a deep desire to witness the conclusion of a tragedy that had haunted their town for nearly 2 decades. Some carried flowers, others stood silently, heads bowed, their expressions a mixture of grief and relief. Mr. Terrence arrived, flanked by his young wife and his 3-year-old daughter. The sight of the freshly dug graves made his knees tremble, and he had to take a moment to steady himself before approaching. Every step felt surreal. It was both a confrontation with the past and a journey toward a long-sought peace. He knelt by the graves, tracing the simple wooden markers with a trembling hand. The names were engraved clearly now. Jeremiah Terrence and his beloved mother, finally given recognition, finally given a resting place. The ceremony began quietly, with the pastor speaking solemnly about life, loss, and the enduring human spirit. Then it was Mr. Terrence's turn. He stood, face pale, eyes glistening with unshed tears, and delivered a eulogy that would echo in the hearts of all present. His voice, raw with emotion, trembled as he recounted the lives of his son and wife, speaking of their laughter, their kindness, and the mundane joys that had been stolen from them. "I am so sorry," he whispered, tears streaking his face. "I'm sorry I wasn't there that morning. I'm sorry I could not save you. I carry your absence every day, and I will carry it for the rest of my life. But today we honor you. Today you are finally home." As he placed a single delicate flower on each grave, his hands shook violently. He whispered their names once more, and for a moment it felt as though the wind carried his words directly to them. Around him, the town felt the weight of justice and grief intertwining, the story of decades-long injustice finally addressed, and the memory of lives wronged restored to dignity.